Allure, my friends, and today it is time to give you another State of the Realms address. Of course, I am not qualified to do so, but I'm going to do so anyways. This is for the Forgotten Realms, of course, which, admittedly, the state of it hasn't really changed much since the last time I did one of these. Um, the setting is mishandled. It is not treated like it should be. I don't even think it's the official setting anymore for present D&D content, which, as far as I'm concerned, is fine because we don't get novels anyways, and that's really what I'm concerned about. I mean, the lore as it relates to, but uh, I just like it to go back in Ed Greenwood's hands. I'd like another Elminster novel. Now, this year there was one more book release, if you remember. So 2024. This actually is going to come out in 2025, but in 2023 there was two books that came out. Okay, look, I'm excluding the Legend of Drift stuff because I don't care really. Actually, I would like them to axe that series. I know a lot of people like it, but why did somehow those books sell still, even though the barrier to entry is like 35, 36 books or something like that. It's ridiculous. Like I just finished book 14, I think, in the Legend of Drist. I've hated it since like book 6 or something, but here I am. Anyways, they should stop that series. But they did come out with one book, which implied kind of in its ways that it was going to be a series. Again, it's not published by WotC. Who the hell is this? Random House Worlds imprint is. The Fallbacks, Bound to Ruin. Doesn't have the Forgotten Realms logo on it, of course. It is okay. It is like really not what I'm looking for in Forgotten Realms content. Jayla Johnson's a good author, I feel like, and she's written some older Realms material, which is better. When the Forgotten Realms was still a good thing. So I already did a review for this early this year. That came out in like March or something like that. As far as, and again, like I said, maybe there's another Salvatore book that came out. I don't really care at this point. But you can't survive off that. But what they're obviously doing with Salvatore books coming out, and then like occasional stuff like this, and the ones before that attached to the movie, anyways, is they're doing stuff that they feel like can sell. And I guess the old stuff, which I have plenty of on hand, so let's just grab a random book. I guess it doesn't sell. Now I'm not part of the business, but one thing that I know that stuff like this was for is not for the business of it. Okay, it's like you look at like a university, right? Really, it's just career training, just job training. It's not there to actually give you an education. It's there to give you an education so you can get a job, right? Not because you want to learn something, which is what they used to be for, right? Universities used to be for. You have something like Wizards of the Coast or TSR before them, right? They were there to make game products, and gamers used to be big readers. I will admit, gamers don't seem to be as big of readers as they used to be. And so maybe there's less need to sell these books. I feel like that could change. It should change. I think people should be reading, regardless if you're a gamer or not. But people just don't read much these days. And so maybe that's why. And I imagine they didn't make much money anyways. All right. But most academic presses, for example, don't make like any money. So I know it's not the same thing, but still, I do feel like we should get more novels, and I think we should have them in the novel line form as they were, really pre 2015, 2014. So it's been about 10 years since we really had a good thing going for the novels here. So any hopes of it coming back? Honestly, at this point, no. I don't think it's coming back. I don't think it ever will, which is unfortunate. There is a dream of mine that Ed Greenwood gets permission back. He can write more whatever he wants for Forgotten Realms, and that he can have other people write whatever the hell he wants them to write or they want to write. But I feel like at this point, Wizards Coast probably makes too much money off Forgotten Realms. That's not going to happen. So that's a little unfortunate. But what I mostly want to get you here today, because that's just doom and gloom, and it always pretty much is, and I don't want this to be negative, is what I've enjoyed about Forgotten Realms this year. I still haven't played Baldur's Gate 3. I don't have anything to play it on. My computer is old and poop, and I don't have a next generation console or current generation console because it's been a few years now, and there's no reason to say it's next because it's just the current one. But I have read a good amount of books this year. So, for those unaware, I have a goal to read all the Forgotten Realms novels. I first read a Forgotten Realms novel in 2017. I was exposed many years before that to the Forgotten Realms through video games, largely through the Dark Alliance games, what I enjoyed the most. When I was older, the Neverwinter MMO, which they've sadly gutted, but so I won't talk about it because, again, we're going to be happy here. I really enjoy the Forgotten Realms. I love the world. It's like a home to me. So if I want to read something, I don't even want to call it popcorn fiction. It just feels so homey to me, even if the books are mediocre. Generally, not always. Like I've said, I'm not a big fan of Salvatore. But I made a goal to read all the books, right? So I first read in 2017. I made that goal in early 2020. So it's been about 5 years. And this year, actually, we hit a big milestone. But I hit it back in April, so I made a video back then. But I'll mention it here. I hit my 100 book mark. I've read 100 Forgotten Realms books. And actually, at the end of this year, I've read 112, if I'm remembering correctly. So let me do math real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But yeah, 12. I read 112 Forgotten Realms books so far. So this year, actually, I'll just go in order of all the books I read. Quickly give you some thoughts. Go over my favorites, my least favorites, what I want to read next year, maybe what I didn't get to this year. So my low goal for this year was to read 11, because that's what I read last year, which was considerably less than the year before that. I don't remember what it was at this point, but I think it was like 18. Anyways, so my medium goal was 18. If I could keep it somewhere in that range, I would finish my reading goal of reading all of them somewhere within around a decade. It's still a while, but there's a lot of books, and I'm not just reading these. I do read a lot, but I read a lot of other stuff as well. And my high goal was to have 24, and anything extra was a bonus, right? Like I read 2 a month would be 24, right? So how did I do? I read 23, just barely. I just finished one yesterday as of recording this, actually. So I'm not going to read anymore. There's only a couple more days in the year as of recording this as well. So I'm not going to start anymore. But I read 23, and so I'm pretty happy with that. It was kind of an up and down in some sense. So I would say the first part of the year was a little heavier in my reading for the Forgotten Realms. In the second part of the year, I was really in the mood for it early last year. I started running a Castles and Crusades campaign in Cormyr based off my early reading for this year. So let me go over real quick. The first one I read is Murder in Cormyr, which is part of the Mystery series. 2 of them which are set in Forgotten Realms. Chet Williamson, I think this is the only thing he wrote in Forgotten Realms. One of them is Murder in Tarsus, that's in Dragonlance, of course. The other one's a Murder in Harua. I think Murder in Cormyr is the first book in the series, technically, but again, it's not really a series. It's one of those, they're standalones with a common theme, and that's Murder Mysteries. And it's, again, I think it's the Mystery series. But Murder in Cormyr is fun. I enjoyed it. I like Cormyr stuff. It's also in like a area that gets like no focus, right? That's Gars, near the vast swamp, in like the eastern plains of Cormyr. And I really enjoyed it. It is interesting that the guy who's like the main character in a sense, Ben Malaus, is really not the main character. It's his assistant that is pretty much a slave, named Jasper. It does have some interesting things like, he has like halfling blood in him, so apparently he inherently genetically has to steal things or something. So but it is a fun story still. It's a little bit of a mystery going on. There seems to be a lot of murder mysteries in Cormyr, like Spellstorm or what's that one book? Stormlight as well, kind of in part. So anyways, Murder in Cormyr I read in January. And then I also read in January Cormyr by Ed Greenwood and Jeff Grubb, if I remember correctly. And that was a really fun book. It's a good introduction, I feel like, to the Forgotten Realms. It's very epic, so if you want like a more epic story, and it works well as a standalone. It is first in a series, first in a trilogy. There are some things at the end of it that could definitely lead into the rest of the trilogy. I think it's the most solid of the 3, though, and it is also the thickest. So it has like this 2-part story going on. One starting with the founding of Cormyr with like elves and dragons, and then going further into time, closer to get to the modern timeline. And in the modern timeline, we have the Abraxas affair, which is like potentially the end of King Azun the Fourth's reign, right? And this like um perilous time for the realm of Cormyr type of thing. So I really enjoyed it. I think Greenwood is a great author personally. He's kind of hit or miss in some aspects, but here I think he really hits. And I think Jeff Grubb is another one of those authors that I'm a big fan of. These are two big realms guys. And it's good stuff. It was written right around the time of transferring from second edition to third edition, so it is kind of shaking things up in a political sense here, in a world sense. But I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. And so I followed that up actually right with the next two sequels. In February, I read Beyond the High Road, which is by Troy Denning. It's okay. It surprised me actually with how sexual it was. And there's a few books I've read in the Forgotten Realms around this time that have upped sexual content. And I imagine that has something to do with the editing at the time and whoever was in charge in-house, allowing that. There's even like if I'm remembering correctly, in this one, might have been the sequel, like some like religious sexual ritual, for Chantia. Anyway, so it's just interesting. I get surprised, right? Because a lot of these, especially the early Forgotten Realms books, almost seem very YA in a sense, right? There's like things peeking through that kind of want to make it adult fantasy, but I'm assuming they're being held back again by the editor or the publishing, whoever's in charge there or whatever. Here, like I said, it seems a little more laxed, and there's a little bit more sexual content. Beyond the High Road itself introduces an interesting monster character thing called the Gazneth, and this continues with pretty much the end. I don't feel like it's spoilers because I'm not going to tell you how it happens, but the end of Azun's reign, right? How we get Steel Regent in third edition, and deals a lot with like Tanalastra and Vandra Gadahas. I feel like Denning it a little bit in this book with Vanji treats him like, if you've ever read the Halo novels, the Kilo 5 trilogy, which were the first books that come out like after Halo 3 kind of ended, so they're like set post-war, post Halo 3. And Karen Travis wrote those, and you could tell she hated Dr. Halsey as a character. Just everyone and every character in the book has the same opinion of her, and it's a garbage opinion, right? You can kind of tell Denning doesn't really like Vandra Gadahas, I feel like, as a character. It's interesting. And then when you get back to book 3, which is written by Denning and Greenwood, so we have the 3 authors writing 3 books, but the second one's the only one written by one author. So that's Death of the Dragon. You get a very emotional ending, I feel like, which is pretty typical, I think, of Greenwood. Not as emotional as some other ones I've read, like Spellfire Trilogy, Chandrel Saga, I guess. But it's some interesting stuff going on at the end there, and it's heartfelt. So overall, it's a fun trilogy. Again, the most solid piece of it is Cormyr, a novel, right, or whatever. But Beyond the High Road, Death of the Dragon are fun. The high points of February for me, actually, is because I read 2 other Forgotten Realms novels in February. That is Elf Shadow by Lynn Cunningham, was my first Forgotten Realms novel I've read by her. I've read one other novel, is EverQuest, something, The Blood Red Harp or whatever, which I found was okay. I liked it. I mean, I liked the crushed bone stuff and the vampire stuff, but and I read one short story by her called The Great Hunt, if I'm remembering correctly, which is about these 2 characters, actually. So Elf Shadow follows Errolyn Moonblade and Danilo Thon, and this is a interesting one. I really like this book, though. It's such a good thing. The relationship they have there, the relationship Errolyn has with herself and with the past and her family. She's a half elf, and how this works in the Harpers as well, because this is, I think, book 2. Yeah, book 2 in the Harpers, technically. And I really enjoyed it. It just it already feels nostalgic for me when I think back on reading Elf Shadow. The rest of the series, in some sense, not as much, because that is actually another high point for this year. So I finished the Cormyr series very early, Cormyr Saga very early in the year. I finished the Songs and Swords series. There's 5 books this year as well. So Elf Shadow is the first book in Songs and Swords, also book number 2 in Harper's. And I finished that series, and I really enjoyed it. So in April, I read Elf Song, which is really about Danilo. Errolyn makes like a cameo. And I really enjoyed this one too, actually. It has a really fun group of adventurers. But it's missing Errolyn, I think, in the relationship Errolyn and Danilo has. And then Silver Shadows I read in May. And again, it's a similar problem because it's really only Errolyn and Danilo's not there. And so we get like these contrasting characters. They seem not to really like they're going to mesh. There's obviously some romance that could happen, it seems like, but they're seeming not to mesh. But then we get Thornhold, which is getting really only about Danilo. Um, some fun new characters like Bronwyn as well in this one. And I read Thornhold in August. And so then I finally read The Dream Spheres in December. So I just recently finished it earlier this month. And I really enjoyed Dream Spheres because it gets Arlen and Danilo back together. And in fact, you get to finally blossom some stuff. And it does, I think this is an okay way to end the series. Um, you get some good closure, and I think the closure with the romance is what makes it okay. But there are some things left undone at the end of it, and as far as I'm aware, there was supposed to be a sixth book that ended up getting canceled because it was just delayed too long, and then third edition ended and fourth edition happened, and that wasn't going to happen, obviously, because fourth edition had this huge dumb time jump. So, anyways, that's sad. I really like these books, Songs and Swords. So I'm looking forward to reading more by Elaine Cunningham in the Forgotten Realms. I'll get more to that later, though. So continuing in February, though, I also read Masquerades by Jeff Grubb and Kate Novak, which is pretty much a sequel set 10 years later to the Finder Stone trilogy, which is one of my favorite series in the Forgotten Realms, starting with Azure Bonds. In fact, Azure Bonds was a big influence on me for my own book that I had come out this year. My main character is heavily inspired by Alias. Also heavily inspired by Kusanagi from Ghost in the Shell. Those are like the two main characters. But I love Alias, and even though this book is like it's not phenomenal really in any means, it's cozy. There's a little bit of a mystery going on, set in Westgate actually. I just really enjoyed it, and it works as a standalone. So it's just so nice to be back with Dragonbait and Alias. I wish there was so many more adventures written about them. I love them. And same with Olive Rustkettle too. Anyways, in March I read Bound for Ruin because again that's when it came out. I don't really have anything to say about it. It's not really memorable. It feels very YA, feels very much for a modern audience. Not for the audience I feel like that would traditionally read Forgotten Realms novels, to be completely honest. And not necessarily a inherently bad thing. It's just not a very good book in that sense. And like I said, I've read other stuff by J.L. Johnson in the Forgotten Realms, which works much better, right? Like Miss Moore, not Miss Moore, Miss Shore. Miss Moore is a EverQuest name. Miss Shore, I think it's Miss Shore. Anyways, it's been a few years. But yeah, whatever. I don't have much to say about it. Elminster in Hell is the fourth Elminster novel, my least favorite probably of them. It's okay. I mean, it's mostly about Elminster being tortured, and a lot of the stuff that's going on actually is memories of his and of other people's that he has, and they're getting like kind of as he's getting interrogated by a devil, pretty much. And I think it has the emotional stuff there that Greenwood is good at. It just doesn't land as well in some sense as far as entertainment value goes. It's a pretty torturous novel in some sense. Speaking of, I read another Greenwood book right around the same time. Actually, I was reading them both at the same time. It was Stormlight, which is also in the Harper's series. I don't remember which number it is, but I think it's a great novel just because it's called Stormlight, and one of the most popular fantasy series now is Stormlight Archive, right? And you have this old Stormlight book, which is not related to it in any ways. This one follows Storm with a murder mystery in Cormyr, a random, really obscure part of Cormyr, and the first half of it's fine. The second half of it is just insane magic stuff over and over and over again, and I was not a big fan of that as much. This kind of reminded me in some ways, I think it's the second book in the Shadow of the Avatar trilogy, where it's just a lot of fighting with like Malagrum and stuff like that. But that one has a level of charm with the three Rangers that I really enjoyed. And just getting to know the Malagrum was also interesting. Even though the books are like really not great literature in a lot of ways. But Stormlight doesn't really have that. So it's not like super memorable. It's not super enjoyable either. I mean, you do get like the Ed Greenwood stuff, which is he's great for lore and like little tiny tidbits, but it's an okay novel, I guess. Then in April, I read Elf Song, which I kind of already talked about. Enjoyed it. Um, the adventuring group, I'm totally forgetting the name right now, is a phenomenal one. And then also in April, I read Pool of Radiance, which was my 100th Forgotten Realms novel. I really enjoyed this one. Um, I It just feels kind of like a classic D&D novel more than specifically Forgotten Realms. It has a really interesting character idea too, where there's this young woman who, through an accident, at the beginning of the book, she becomes like this beefy, like super strong woman, right? And it's just like a funny, interesting transformation. And the story itself is about Flan around the Moon Sea. There's a famous video game, of course, and I enjoyed it. It's nothing really simple about it in a lot of ways. But the reason I read that one around the time was actually because Jim Ward passed away right around that time earlier this year, and he was the author along with Anne K. Brown, I think, is the one who wrote the first. He wrote with two co-authors, these two women, Jane Cooper Hong. I think he wrote the second two with, and then I think it was Anne K. Brown for the first one. I may be switching that though on accident. So I enjoy Pool of Radiance though. I mean, it's nothing like it's not great literature, but it is enjoyable. Again, like I said, it feels like classic D&D or what I imagine classic D&D to be like because I wasn't around to play it. I have played AD&D since, but anyways. In May, I read Baldur's Gate 2: Shadows of Am. It's not a very memorable novel by Philip Athens. Um, in fact, I don't really have much to say about it. I haven't played Baldur's Gate 2 excessively. Maybe I'd think more of it if I'd read it. Maybe I'd think less of it if I'd played the game more. Anyways, and then I also read Silver Shadows, which I kind of already talked about, which it really takes place in like the forest of Tethir, I guess, which could be interesting to some people. It involves elves and like wild kind of wood elves relations with the humans outside the forest type of thing. Um, it is interesting, and you get a lot of elven relationships too, and how a half elf fits into this society or doesn't fit into it. And then June, I didn't read any, so that's my first month I didn't read any. Which again, I was trying to read at least one a month, and at that point I'd read two a month at least. I read two in January, four in February, three in March, two in April, two in May, and then June nothing. June was a weird month. I read very little altogether in June. In fact, I kind of started late in May. I started not really reading much. Silver Shadows was the last fiction book I'd read for a while there, actually. But then in July, I pick it back up with one book. This Pools of Darkness, the sequel to Pool of Radiance. This one's okay. It's interesting that it's set later in life, and so they're a little older, different plot line going on. I think there's a game for this one as well. I remember reading this one on my way back from vacation in Colorado. I remember like a super windy night in Wyoming. We were camping on our way back and reading this. So I guess that's memorable. And then in August, I read two books. I read Thornhold, which again is fine as far as the novel goes. Again, book 4 and Songs and Swords. So I already kind of talked about it. Then I read Red Magic, which I was hoping would be better. It has a great stinking cover, one of the best covers I've seen in a Forgotten Realms novel. And the book itself is about red wizards, but it's just super mediocre. It's just cheesy. The main character is not memorable. There's a centaur character I really didn't care for at all. I don't remember his name. It was like Winter or something. Yeah, it's just not really that memorable. My favorite character in the whole book was the villain, who again is not really that good of a villain, but he's fun in a sense, and he's more fun than the bland heroes of the story. So, in fact, I don't remember the main character's name right now. So, anyways, in September though, I read Elminster's Daughter, which finished me for the Elminster series. I know it's called Open Ended. There are other Elminster books. They're not normally included in the Elminster series because I think the next 3 books are technically like a trilogy. They must be more connected in some way. I haven't read them. I think it's the Sage of Shadowdale trilogy. But Elminster's Daughter, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed it more than Elminster in Hell. There is a super long chase scene in this book that really doesn't need to be there. But overall, like the emotion of Elminster and his daughter is this conversation they have at the end is great. I aspire to write something like that. And I don't know. I like this one. Again, it's kind of cheesy. It's got lots of magic stuff going on. It's largely set in Cormyr, though partially in Waterdeep and Dale Lands and stuff like that. So it's fun. I enjoyed it. I am a sucker. And apparently Ed Greenwood is too, and he writes the type of books that I'm a sucker for. So anyways, and then so I finished a series there in September, and I also finished another one because I read Pool of Twilight. So the third Pools book. There's another Pools book. It's written by a different author. I'm not sure how much it connects. Pool of Radiance, Ruins of Mithrain, or by Carrie Bebis? I don't remember. Something like that. I've been meaning to read it. It's technically a standalone for a later video game again. So, anyways, I think by a company named SSI, but I think it's a different SSI than the other one. I have to look that up. I haven't read it yet. I'll look it up when I read it. But Pool of Twilight is it has kind of more of a follow-up to the second book. It has younger characters that are the children of the main characters from the first two books, which is an interesting twist. Probably the least memorable, though, I'd say, of the first of the trilogy. That's for me. I do like the character Miltiades, but yeah, I don't know. It's okay. And then I kind of want to hurry this up because I'm getting tired of talking. But in October, again, I read nothing. So October was another one of those, unfortunately. But in November, I read The Night Parade, which is kind of a spooky one by Scott Cianson. Follows Myrmeen Law and her time in Calumport. Really, that's where it takes place mostly, and that's where she's from. And about it starts in such an interesting way, though, because it's kind of a dark novel, like I said, but it starts off with her meeting her ex-husband, and you're like, oh, maybe their romance will blossom again. And then you find out that her ex-husband supposedly was involved in the death of their daughter. And so Miriam kills him. Anyways, so that was just like a gripping start, to say the least. An interesting one. In fact, I used something like this shortly after reading it, The Night Parade. The faction itself that is very important in this story, for a one-shot that I ran, and I put it in Neverwinter, kind of, but for some my group, and that was fun. So it gave me that inspiration that I really wanted to use like right away. That's the only thing I read in November, though. And then in December, I closed it out with reading 4 books. So I had 2 months reading 4 books this year, February and December. And it started with The Ring of Winter, which was, again, okay. Artist Ember is an okay character. He's kind of important in the 5th edition content with The Ring of Winter and type of stuff. But book itself was fine. I don't really have much to say besides it takes place in Chult, and it's about the Ring of Winter. And then the Dream Spheres I already kind of talked about. Last book, Song of Swords. I enjoyed it for the closure we get in some things, and but even though it's missing some other closure bits. And then the last 2 books I read this year are actually probably my least favorite Forgotten Realms books I read this year. And that was Darkwalker on Moonshae, which is the first book in the Moonshae trilogy, which is the first Forgotten Realms book ever published. But it wasn't originally meant as a Forgotten Realms book, and you can tell because it focuses a lot more on world building and plot even than it should. And it doesn't feel super Forgotten Realms because of that. It feels very excluded from the rest of the Forgotten Realms in some sense because it wasn't originally meant to be part of the Forgotten Realms. And the first part of the book is really about this adventure, kind of more D&D classic adventure, heavily Arthurian, Celtic, Britain kind of thing inspired. But the first part I really liked. The second part that gets much more epic fantasy in scope really lost my interest because the characters are just very not something I cared about when we got to that point, and it just didn't really work well for me. I will read the next 2 books. In fact, we're kind of getting in my goals is to read the next 2 books in that series this year. I kind of wanted to read this whole series this year, but it just didn't happen. And I'm not super eager to read the next 2 books, but since I want to finish the series I've started, and it's an actual series, it's not like just a series of standalones, which a lot of these are, and I've read 2 of the books in the Nobles series, and I think I read 1 last year and 1 the year before, but none this year. But those are just standalones. So anyways, so it was fine. I think Dark Wizards or something like that is Dark Wizard maybe is the next book. I'm not sure when I'll read it. I think Douglas Niles could do a better job. Again, I just think he needs to focus on character more, especially when D&D books are heroic fantasy. I think character work is more important because a lot of times they're not very epic. And that's when you get like the mediocre books, kind of like Red Magic or The Ring of Winter type of thing. I just don't care. And then when you get to this point where you decide to make a decision, and it doesn't work for me, and that's why Darkwalker and Moonshae was one of my least favorite books this year. If you get the newer edition of it, which is still not in print, obviously, it does have like a foreword or preface or whatever by R.A. Salvatore, which I guess is nice for historical note. And then the last book I read this year, speaking of R.A. Salvatore, Servant of the Shard, because I didn't read Drizzt It's been a hot minute because I need to step away because stuff gives me an aneurysm. Um, Sword in the Shard I thought might be a little better because it's not actually about Drizzt, but I was wrong because it's about two characters I really don't care about, and the Drow, which were always written terribly by Salvatore, with no nuance really at all. And they're just evil and it's gross and it's stupid and I didn't enjoy it. And with the freaking Crystal Shard too, which is again overdone. I don't even like the sneaker thing. And he introduces Catterley, which is like I hated the Cleric Quintet when I finished that in like 2021 or whatever it was. My least favorite series 2021. My least favorite Forgotten Realms series I've ever read, Cleric Quintet. Oh gosh, it's gross. I know a lot of people like Salvatore. I know a lot of people like Cleric Quintet outside of Drizzt stuff. I think Salvatore is a terrible writer, completely mediocre at his best, and overwrought fight scenes. They're way too long. Oh my goodness, his character work is terrible. His naming is awful. Tigger Willies, what the hell? Hephaestus. Gosh, okay. Anyways, Rye Guy? What? That doesn't even make any sense. And yeah, so yeah, Ray Guy, whatever you want to call it. That's such a bad freaking name. Holy crap. Um, but I can't, man. I can't stand it. And I did not enjoy this book. I think there was a setup there enough for a more entertaining book 2 and 3 in Cell Swords, especially since this was actually originally before the Sea of Swords, which I read previously, because the way the series are organized now is different. Because this was not part of Cell Swords originally, is whatever the other series is called. I don't remember. Anyways, so next year I'd like to read the next 2 Moonshade books. There's a follow-up trilogy to that, but I don't know when the heck I read that. And then the next 2 Sellsword books, God help me. But as far as stuff I'm looking forward to enjoying, I would like to finish the Harper series because I'm over halfway through it now. The main one I'm really looking forward to, which is actually the last one I'll read probably though, is Finder's Bane because it's by Jeff Grubb and Kate Novak, and I'm a big fan of them. It doesn't really follow those characters I love, but I think there's some stuff in there I'll enjoy a lot. Yeah, looking forward to reading that one. And then I'm looking forward to reading more Elaine Cunningham. I'm thinking I'll probably read Starlight and Shadow, her Drow series. I read one short story about that main character in some anthology. I don't remember what it is right now. Realms of the Underdark, maybe. And yeah, I enjoyed that. So we'll see how she handles Drow. I think Salvatore's influence is so strong that it probably isn't going to be great just because of that. In some sense, I think the way Greenwood had handled Drow would be a lot better. But anyways, which is why I want to read his Dark Elf books that are not for realm stuff. But anyhow, and I'd like to read more at Greenwood as well. I'd like to think. I think I might read his Knights of Myth Draenor finally. That trilogy. I don't remember what it starts with. Swords of Evening Star or something like that. I don't know. I think I'll enjoy those, and I look forward to reading them. So there's some other stuff I'll surely read. There's lots I have on my shelf. I'd like to get more. I've collected very few Forgotten Realms books this year because I've been broke like the entire year. But there's some more stuff I have on the shelf, a lot more stuff on the shelf I haven't read. So we'll see what happens. And hopefully I get, again, the goal, kind of the low 11, middle 18, high 24 or above is kind of the goal for next year too. So we'll see what happens. So anyways, I know it's a long video now, but that's my Forgotten Realms update. Thanks for watching. Check out my blog. That's Forgotten Realms blog, Forgotten Realms Lyceum at ForgottenRealmsReading.com. But I do a lot of Forgotten Realms content here too. So anyways.